Matt slammed the eviction notice on the counter, rage twisting his face. His mother, Helen, sat miles away, barefoot on the beach, smiling at the life they tried to steal. They thought a mother's love meant unlimited forgiveness. Helen taught them what it really meant: limits. She didn't just retire from work, she retired from being their crutch. And when the dust settled, it wasn't the mother left bankrupt, it was the children. The laughter rolled across the dining room like a wave, loud, thoughtless, drowning. Helen sat quietly at the head of the table, her wine glass untouched, the edges of her smile brittle. They were laughing at her, and they didn't even realize it. The dishes were still warm, the last of the roast chicken and garlic potatoes half eaten when Helen mentioned it. "I think I'm ready to retire," she said casually, folding her napkin into a neat square on her lap. For a second, silence. Then Chloe snorted into her water glass, trying to stifle a giggle. Matt caught her eye and chuckled too, his fork clinking loudly against his plate as he exaggeratedly wiped his mouth. "Retire?" Chloe said, a little too loudly. "Mom, what would you even do? You'd lose your mind without us needing you for everything." Matt leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, smiling that easy, careless smile he'd perfected since childhood. "Yeah, come on, Mom. Retire from what? You've been semi-retired for years, living the easy life." Their laughter filled the room again, overlapping, careless. Helen sat perfectly still. The chandelier above them, one she had paid for in installments while Matt was still in college, swung slightly as the air conditioning kicked on. The smell of buttered rolls and lemon pie hung thick in the air. Beneath it all, a sharper scent rose, something metallic and faintly bitter, resentment. But Helen only smiled, a tight practice thing. She passed the salad bowl to Chloe, who didn't notice that Helen's hand lingered a fraction too long before letting go. She glanced around the table, the plates, the furniture, the clothes on their backs, all purchased at least once by the woman they were laughing at now, and they didn't even know. They laughed over a meal she bought sitting on chairs she financed inside a home she co-signed into existence. After dinner, Helen busied herself in the kitchen, alone as usual. Matt had made a lazy excuse about needing to prep for a big meeting. Clue had flopped on the couch to scroll through Instagram, her fingers flicking fast, her eyes glazed over. Helen scrubbed a pot clean, methodical. She watched the soapy water swirl down the drain like time itself, decades spent boiling down into something unseen. The urge to cry flickered and died just as fast. Instead, she dried her hands, carefully smoothing invisible creases from the dish towel, and walked into her small office off the hallway. She closed the door softly behind her. No one noticed. They never did. She sat at her desk, the chair creaking a little under her weight. She pulled open the bottom drawer and retrieved an old tablet she kept hidden from the same people who laughed without realizing they were laughing at the only parachute they had ever known. Helen powered it on. The banking app opened immediately. It wasn't the shared family account, not the one Matt dipped into for emergencies that usually looked like trips to Cabo or down payments on luxury cars. This was hers. The screen loaded with a gentle chime, displaying figures that looked, frankly, like freedom. Not extravagant, but enough to buy peace, enough to cut ties. She tapped around, scrolling through the hidden trust funds, the emergency reserves quietly tucked away, the silent safeguards she'd built while they weren't paying attention. Her reflection, caught in the black screen as it flickered between apps, didn't look bitter. She looked ready. Helen smiled again, smaller this time, more real, and whispered under her breath, "Maybe it's time to retire more than just my job." Her thumb hovered over the button, transfer funds, freeze access, change beneficiaries. With a quiet tap, she opened the first setting. The laughter from the living room trickled down the hallway, muffled by distance. Helen didn't hear it anymore. She was already planning their retirement. They never asked where the money came from. It just appeared, like light switches flipping on or heaters humming in winter. They only noticed something was wrong when the lights began to flicker and the warmth started to vanish. Helen sat at her desk in the dim morning light, tapping her fingertip against the glass screen of her tablet. The banking app glowed quietly, the numbers soothing, steady. Her thumb hovered over the transfer option. Not a full withdrawal yet, no. She would start small, barely noticeable amounts at first, a quiet erosion, like a tide pulling at the sand beneath a careless castle. She moved $500 into her private trust, then $200, then another $700 a week later. Tiny shifts, ghost withdrawals. Not enough to set off alarms, not yet. She scrolled through the transaction history of the family emergency account, an account she had personally kept alive for over a decade, the one Matt and Chloe leaned on like a crutch they never thought would snap. The entries were insultingly casual. Tulum airfare, Chloe, Matt, electronics world purchase, couples massage package, anniversary gift. Helen's jaw tightened. Her finger slowed as she scrolled further. Not hospital bills, not job loss emergencies, vacations, spa days, new phones, luxury gym memberships. Each withdrawal was a confession they never spoke aloud. They had never needed her sacrifices. They had expected them. Her mind drifted back unbidden to a memory from years ago. Matt, 19, and panicked, standing on her doorstep in the rain, soaked to the skin and shivering. "Mom, I just need a little help just until payday, I promise." He had looked so desperate, so young. She hadn't hesitated. She hadn't even asked how much. Now she wondered if the rain that night had ever been real or just another scene he learned to play. Later that week, Helen sat in the sterile wood-scented office of Ms. Geller, her new financial planner. The young woman wore simple pearl earrings and spoke with the calm precision of someone used to steering sinking ships. "You want full asset protection?" Ms. Geller asked, tapping her pen thoughtfully. Helen nodded once. "I want everything rerouted, trusts, private accounts, untouchable by family members." Ms. Geller smiled faintly, as if she had heard the word family used like a threat before. "Smart move. Most people wait too long." Helen smiled too, but it didn't reach her eyes. She signed the papers without hesitation, each signature feeling like a chain snapping off her wrist. By the time she left the office, she no longer just had money, she had armor. That night, Helen sat at her desk. The tablet glowed softly. On the screen, the family emergency account. She hovered over the freeze account button. In her mind, every unpaid bill, every favor disguised as duty, every sacrifice folded into expectation. She clicked. Account frozen. No alert sent. No warning given. In the living room, Chloe's laughter carried from the television. Helen quietly closed the office door. Let them enjoy the warmth while it lasted. They'd feel the cold soon enough. At the boutique, Chloe smiled at the cashier, arms heavy with pastel bags. Her platinum card was swiped once, then again, declined. Her smile faltered. "Try it again," she said, voice brittle behind the charm. "I'm sorry," the cashier said. "It's not going through." Chloe flushed. She checked her phone. Her banking app spun, then flashed. "Account access restricted." People behind her shifted. The air grew tight. "It's a glitch," she muttered, grabbing her things and leaving. By the time she reached the car, she was dialing. Matt answered. "Hey, babe. My card declined," she hissed. "At Vera's. In front of everyone." He laughed. "Probably a bank check. Bank checks don't lock me out of my own account." Silence. "You think it's your mom?" he asked. "Call her." Later that night, Matt called. "Hi, Mom," he said sweetly. "Just a little thing. Chloe's card declined today. Thought maybe you'd want to check?" Helen's voice came back syrupy. "Oh dear, that sounds stressful." "Yeah. Weird, right?" A pause, then. "I'll look into it after my nap." "Your nap?" "You know how it is," she said cheerfully. "Retirement, exhausting." And she hung up. Matt stared at the phone, stunned. Inside her study, Helen placed her phone down gently and leaned back into the armchair. The late afternoon sun streamed through the curtains, dust motes dancing in the golden light. She wasn't angry, she wasn't triumphant, she was simply finished. Her mind drifted back to the memory of Matt as a boy, 7 years old, wobbling on his first two-wheeler in the cul-de-sac. She had jogged behind him, breathless with hope, steadying his balance with one hand until he found it himself. He had turned to her, cheeks flushed with pride, shouting, "Look, Mom, I can do it." And she had clapped and laughed and cheered because back then he had still seen her. Back then, gratitude had been pure. Helen smiled faintly now, watching the sun sink lower outside. You outgrew gratitude, she whispered. I outgrew guilt. Meanwhile, in a half-lit living room across town, Chloe sat hunched over her laptop, eyes burning with frustration. Matt paced the room behind her. This isn't right, Chloe said. She can't just freeze accounts without telling us. Technically, they're not ours, Matt muttered. Chloe glared at him. Technicalities don't pay bills. She scrolled furiously, clicking into an old email thread with their family lawyer, requesting an appointment. Topic: Financial rights and power of attorney clarification. She hit send with a sharp jab of her finger. If Helen thought she could pull the plug without consequences, she was about to learn just how ugly family business could get. They sat across the lawyer's desk, smiling like predators in polite clothing. Matt cleared his throat. Chloe squeezed his hand under the table. Helen only smiled back, knowing they thought they were leading the conversation. They didn't realize the signatures they needed had already sealed their fate years ago. The conference room smelled faintly of leather chairs and fresh printer ink. A window buzzed from a cracked seal, letting in the steady hum of traffic outside. Helen sat between Matt and Chloe, a leather-bound folder in her lap, playing her part perfectly, the sweet, confused mother. Across from them, Mr. Clean, the family lawyer, clicked his pen once and leaned forward. So, Chloe began, her voice syrupy smooth, we've been thinking it's really important to plan ahead. For emergencies, health issues, just to be safe. Matt chimed in, his tone forced, light. Yeah, like if you needed someone to handle paperwork, if, God forbid, something happened. We just want to be prepared, for your sake. Helen nodded slowly, her hands folded neatly over the folder. And you want? She prompted. Chloe smiled too quickly. A durable power of attorney, she said, sliding a packet across the table. We just handle the hard stuff, banking, property decisions, purely practical. Helen lifted the packet with careful fingers. The weight of it felt like a chain. She skimmed the highlighted sections. Matt and Chloe had done their homework, pre-filled, pre-planned, their names already typed where signatures would go. Helen traced a finger over her name. Helen Monroe. Still hers, for now. She looked up, face serene. This is a lot to digest, she said gently. I'll need time to think. Chloe's jaw tightened for a fraction of a second, but she masked it quickly. Of course, she said. Take all the time you need. Matt offered a strained laugh. Not too long, though, just in case. Helen smiled warmly at them both. Of course. That evening, the sunset painted the house in gold and violet. Helen moved slowly, methodically, through the hall closet, pulling down old boxes thick with dust and memories. She found it buried beneath stacks of old tax records, a plain manila envelope. Inside, original deeds, purchase agreements, bank statements, Matt's house a decade ago. He couldn't qualify for a mortgage on his own. Helen had co-signed without hesitation, without protection, because back then, loyalty hadn't felt like a risk. She unfolded the original contract carefully, the paper crinkling like brittle autumn leaves. Her name, right there, right beside his. Co-owner, legally binding, controlling interest. They had forgotten, or maybe assumed her signature meant permission. They didn't realize it meant control. Helen spent the next hour updating her will, quietly, methodically. She logged into her private legal portal and rerouted inheritances. Matt and Chloe's names disappeared, replaced with the names of two nieces Helen hadn't spoken to in years, but who had once called her Auntie Helen and meant it. She uploaded the scanned house documents. She confirmed her new healthcare proxy, someone unbiased, untouchable by guilt or manipulation. It wasn't anger fueling her fingers, it was precision, the slow, careful reclaiming of a life handed over too easily. Later, Helen sat by the fireplace with mint tea, listening to the quiet tick of the clock. Her phone buzzed, an email alert. New activity detected, loan application attempted. She opened it without surprise. Chloe's name glared from the screen. She had tried to list Helen as a co-signer without permission. Helen let out a dry chuckle, They still thought they could write her name onto things without consequence. What they didn't see was that she had already started writing them out of her life. Betrayal hadn't arrived in a scream. It came through paperwork, false signatures hidden in familiar fonts. As Helen reviewed the flagged activity, the mortgage application revealed more. Matt and Chloe had used her name as inactive co-owner on 2 filings, aiming to refinance debt against property she technically still owned. They had mistaken her silence for consent, but Helen saw it now, sharp and clear. They thought she had no use for money anymore. The truth? She had no use for them. By noon, she had filed a fraud report, identity misuse, unauthorized leverage. By 2 p.m., she'd canceled every card tied to her name. Chloe's VIP concert tickets? Declined. By sunset, Helen's financial footprint was reduced to something beautiful, quiet, untraceable, and wholly her own. Across town, Chloe's tantrum exploded like fireworks no one had asked for at a brunch with friends. She slammed her mimosa glass down, splashing sticky orange across the white linen. "Can you believe my own mother is withholding access?" Chloe hissed. "After everything we've done for her." Her friends exchanged awkward glances. One stirred her coffee too intently. "Isn't it her money?" Someone ventured carefully. Chloe waved her hand dismissively. "Technicality. Family doesn't nickel and dime, family." No one responded. The clink of cutlery and whispered side conversations filled the awkward air, but Chloe didn't notice. She was too busy texting Matt furiously under the table. Handle it before she ruins everything. Helen, meanwhile, stood in front of her mirror, holding a simple suitcase. Inside, 2 sundresses, a sun hat, sandals, and a worn paperback. She hadn't had time to finish in years. She ran a comb through her silver-streaked hair, applied a soft pink lipstick, and tied a scarf around her neck. No announcement, no farewell speech, no guilt. She booked a luxury cruise, an ocean view balcony suite for a full month, using only her private trust funds. The email confirmation popped up on her phone. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Helen Monroe. Bon voyage." Helen smiled. For the first time in decades, her journey would not begin with permission slips or guilt payments. It would begin with freedom. Before she left, Helen sat at the kitchen table and pulled out a blank postcard. She wrote slowly, the words forming like the tides outside the cruise ship she hadn't yet boarded. "Enjoy your bills. I'm enjoying my balcony view." No signature, just a crisp, final punctuation to a chapter she had already decided would not be rewritten. She dropped the postcard into the mailbox at the end of her driveway, casual, unhurried, as if mailing a birthday card. Then she turned her back on the house that had once held her hostage with invisible chains of obligation. On board the ship later that evening, Helen stood at the railing as the horn sounded, a low, powerful groan that vibrated through her bones. The city lights faded behind her. The ocean opened ahead. She sipped a glass of champagne, leaned into the salt, sweet breeze, and closed her eyes. Back home somewhere, Chloe would be receiving her little gift. But Helen wasn't there to see the tantrum. She was busy watching the horizon stretch out before her, wide, endless, and finally her own. It happened faster than they could spin the excuses. One day, their world spun like always. Free drinks, upgraded flights, endless handouts. The next, it cracked open at their feet. Smiles turned stiff, credit lines turned cold. And Helen, she didn't lift a finger. She was too busy dancing under foreign stars. Matt stood in the office parking lot, hands on his hips, watching 2 men in navy blue uniforms clamp tow bars onto his company car. The repo agent barely looked at him. "You're 3 months behind on the co-signed business lease," the man said, handing Matt a folded copy of the default notice. Matt's name, Helen's name, both crossed out in sharp black ink. "But I thought," Matt stammered, cheeks burning in public humiliation. The agent shrugged. "Not my problem, sir. Call your bank." The SUV jolted as it was hauled onto the flatbed truck, glossy black paint flashing under the noon sun. Across town, Chloe's morning wasn't faring any better. She stood at the reception desk of her elite gym, clutching her monogrammed tote bag, face growing hotter by the second. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the receptionist said, awkward but firm. "Your automatic payments declined. Your membership has been terminated until resolved." Chloe laughed, sharp and fake. There must be some mistake. I'll just use a different card. The receptionist's smile tightened. Unfortunately, you were on a special account linked to a cosigner. That account's been frozen. A few heads turned. Someone behind Chloe smirked. It hit her then, really hit her, that whatever financial scaffolding they'd been leaning on had been sawed through. Matt called Helen first, straight to voicemail. Then Chloe tried twice, 3 times. Still nothing. She sent a text. Mom, call us ASAP. There's a huge problem. No read receipt, no little typing dots, no explanation. Helen wasn't just unreachable, she was untouchable. Far from the chaos, Helen stood barefoot on the polished deck of a ship, jazz music drifting on the ocean breeze. In a navy dress, she laughed as an older gentleman spun her beneath fairy lights. When the song ended, she returned to the railing, heels in hand, and breathed in the salt air. Her phone buzzed. Bank alert, legal attempt detected. Parental financial neglect complaint filed. She didn't open it. She'd missed her chance to go to Greece years ago. Matt's wedding had taken priority. You'll have other chances, Mom, he had said. Now she moved without waiting. And when the violin played again, she stepped back into the dance, light as air. In court, silence fell like judgment. Chloe sat across from Helen, tense beside her lawyer. The judge skimmed the complaint, brows drawn. The room held its breath. Helen sat calm, hands folded. Chloe was learning, too late. You can't sue someone who already let go. Ms. Geller, Helen's attorney, stood confidently, barely glancing at the papers she held. Your Honor, Ms. Geller began smoothly. The plaintiff is attempting to claim financial neglect. However, the plaintiff is 35 years old. She has been financially independent by law since her 21st birthday and certainly by her 30th. The judge nodded slowly, waiting. Ms. Geller turned slightly toward Helen without theatrical flair, simply presenting the facts. Helen Monroe has no standing legal obligation to support her adult daughter financially. In fact, she added, tapping the file once for emphasis, all of Ms. Monroe's assets have been legally protected for years. A private trust, isolated pension, and notarized estate planning, all verified before these proceedings. She handed over the neatly organized folders with a soft snap. Chloe's lawyer rose, trying to counter. Your Honor, we contend there was an implied dependency, an established pattern of financial support. The judge raised a hand, cutting him off. Implied dependency is not recognized in this court for adult children. Her voice was crisp, her eyes unimpressed. And certainly not when the alleged victim attempted mortgage fraud against the alleged abuser. Chloe's face flushed red. Matt shifted uncomfortably beside her, his hands twitching in his lap. The courtroom air thickened, hot, heavy, irreversible. Helen didn't gloat. She didn't even smile. She sat still, breathing in the subtle scent of old wood and worn carpet, feeling the invisible, decades-old debts evaporate into nothing. This wasn't about punishment. It was about release. Later that afternoon, Helen boarded the ship again, her shoes clicking softly against the deck as the ocean swallowed the last hints of shore behind them. A group of women she had met on board, a lively collection of retired teachers and nurses, threw an impromptu early retirement party in her honor. Laughter floated into the salt air. Someone handed her a cupcake, tiny and pink with a sparkler sticking out of it like a victorious flag. Helen blew it out with one soft breath, wishing for nothing she didn't already have. Freedom didn't need more candles, it just needed space. That night, Helen wandered into the ship's boutique under soft, glowing lights. She didn't need anything, but she stopped at a jewelry case, drawn to a simple necklace, a silver pendant shaped like a small, open door. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't loud, it was just possibility. She bought it without hesitation. The clerk wrapped it carefully, and Helen slipped the box into her purse as if carrying a secret only she understood, her first real luxury, a gift to herself. No guilt, no second thoughts, no permission needed. Later, sitting on her balcony with a book in her lap and the moon drenching the ocean in silver, her phone buzzed once. A text from Ms. Geller. They're getting desperate. Expect a surprise. Helen didn't flinch. She sipped her tea, the steam curling against the cool night air, and smiled softly. Desperation wasn't something to fear. It was just the sound of a drowning past, gasping for air. and Helen had already learned how to swim without them. You can tell when someone's apology is real. It sounds different. It breathes differently. Real apologies bleed. Fake ones knock politely, hold in flowers bought on clearance, and when you open the door, they smile like nothing ever happened. Helen knew the difference before she even turned the handle. As Helen pulled into the driveway, the porch lights blinked on. Everything looked just as she left it, except for Matt. He stood by the door, clutching a wilted bouquet. Behind him, Chloe sat hunched in their SUV, tapping furiously on her phone. Helen sat in the car for a moment, breathing in the cool air. No anger, just clarity. "Mom," Matt called, hurrying toward her. "I didn't know when you'd be back. Thought I'd wait." She walked to the door without a word. He followed, the flowers crackling between them. "I just wanted to talk," he said, voice unsteady. "I know we messed up. I miss you, Mom." Helen unlocked the door, but didn't invite him in. He lingered. "Maybe we can fix things. We're still family, right?" She looked him in the eyes. Behind the panic and regret, she saw it, calculation. Matt didn't miss her. He missed the net he thought would always catch him. Inside the car, Chloe slammed her hand against the dashboard and typed another venomous post. Some people forget who took care of them. Family, drama, ungrateful. Her fingers flew, tagging mutual friends, painting herself the victim, because if the truth didn't fit, Chloe would simply manufacture a louder version. Back on the porch, Matt cleared his throat awkwardly. "I even wrote you a letter," he said, fishing a folded paper from his back pocket. "Just something to say sorry." Helen accepted it without a word. She stepped inside, closing the door firmly between them before he could say anything else. Through the frosted glass, she watched his silhouette linger for a second. Then, defeated, he trudged back toward the car. The SUV peeled out faster than necessary, tires scraping the curb, as it disappeared down the street. Helen locked the door behind her. She leaned against it, the cool wood solid against her spine, and unfolded the letter. The words blurred together, apologies mixed with veiled guilt trips, lines about what family owes each other, promises that smelled more like demands. Helen smiled sadly. Then she carried the letter to the kitchen, fed it into her shredder, and watched it dissolve into unrecognizable confetti. Later that night, curled up in her favorite reading chair, a soft chime echoed from her phone, a notification. Helen picked it up, her heart steady. On the screen, "Chloe Andrews posted a new story." Helen opened it without hesitation. "Some mothers abandon you when you need them most. Yes, toxic family. Sad truth. Hurts." Underneath was a photo, an old family shot Helen hadn't even remembered posing for, cropped so she looked distant, almost cruel. A curated villain, a tailor-made martyrdom. Helen set the phone down gently on the side table. No reply needed. Some battles are lost the second you start arguing with a liar. It's easy to rewrite history when you think no one kept the receipts. Clue posted a lie, dressed in a sob story, sure the world would believe her. But Helen didn't argue, she didn't rage. She simply opened a folder labeled Proof and started printing. The post went live just after midnight. Helen found it the next morning, sipping her coffee in the soft light of her kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator the only other sound. Chloe's words stared back at her from the phone screen. "Some elderly parents can't handle losing control. Sad to watch them spiral into bitterness after a lifetime of love and support. Family first. Pray for healing." The photo attached was worse, an old snapshot of Helen cropped tight to show a frown mid-conversation. Probably mid-sneeze, Helen thought dryly. It painted her as cold, angry, unreachable. The comments had already begun stacking up. "Sending you love, Chloe. You're so strong. Toxic parents are the worst. Prayers up. Stay positive." Helen scrolled slowly, unmoved. Truth didn't panic. Truth waited. By noon, Chloe's follow-up post dropped like gasoline onto dry leaves. After everything we did for her, support, care, kindness, she turned on us. Elderly woman now broke and angry, blaming family for her failures. Helen set her phone down with a quiet click. She walked to the small filing cabinet she kept tucked behind the living room bookshelf, hidden, forgotten. The lock clicked open. Inside, a lifetime's worth of careful record keeping. Bank transfers, property deeds, emails with timestamps, mortgage payment records in Helen's name, payments that had kept Matt and Chloe housed for years. Every dollar, every signature, every silent rescue they had long since rewritten as obligation. She laid them out across the kitchen table under the soft hum of the overhead light. The documents fluttered slightly under the fan, thin and razor sharp as knives. Her mind slipped backward for a moment to a younger Matt, maybe 11 years old, slumped at the kitchen table struggling over an English essay. Always tell the truth, Maddie, she had coached gently. Tell it clean, tell it plain. It's the only story that doesn't fall apart later. She remembered the pride in his eyes when he got an A on that paper. She remembered thinking she had taught him something permanent. She was wrong. Helen gathered the papers methodically into 2 folders: receipts, timeline. She opened her laptop, attached the evidence into a clean, unassailable file, and drafted a quiet, lethal email, not to Chloe, not to Matt, to her lawyer, subject line, defamation filing request, immediate action. She hit send with no ceremony. The hum of the dishwasher kicked on behind her, low and steady. The world outside her window was brilliant with spring, green and stubborn and alive. Helen smiled faintly, let Chloe enjoy her temporary likes, her plastic sympathy, because real courtrooms didn't run on hashtags. They ran on proof. The next afternoon, Helen walked into the FedEx office, documents under her arm. The air smelled of toner and fresh paper. "How can I help you today?" the clerk asked. Helen placed a manila envelope on the counter. "Overnight to the county clerk." The clerk tapped keys. "Filing for a hearing?" Helen nodded. "Defamation." The woman paused, then murmured, "Good for you," sliding the label over. Helen smiled. Back home, she turned her phone face down. She didn't care what Chloe posted or what apology Matt crafted. She didn't need noise, only patience. Chloe had declared war with fiction. Helen answered with facts. You don't argue with liars. You wait, build your case, and let truth speak louder than drama. Helen didn't defend herself. She let the mirror do the cutting and never blinked. The courtroom smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood, a solemn sort of silence draping over the rows of benches. Helen walked in slowly, her simple navy suit pressed and spotless, a thin folder tucked beneath her arm. Her sunglasses came off as she reached her seat, revealing eyes that weren't angry or scared. They were clear, dangerously clear. Across the aisle, Matt slumped low in his chair, tapping his foot with anxious energy he couldn't contain. Beside him, Chloe sat ramrod straight, her arms folded tightly, her face pulled into a mask of wounded dignity. Only the trembling of her jaw betrayed her. The judge, a woman in her late 50s with a sharp jawline and sharper eyes, called the room to order. The clerk read out the case, Helen Monroe versus Chloe Andrews. Defamation, seeking damages for public misrepresentation and reputational harm. Helen sat still, letting Ms. Geller do what she did best. Ms. Geller rose, smooth and composed, and began speaking with the calm authority of someone who knew the ending before the story even started. Your Honor, she said, handing over a neatly organized binder, this is not a case built on speculation. It's built on records, proof, years of verifiable financial support provided by Ms. Monroe to her adult children, well beyond any legal obligation. The judge flipped through the binder, her face unreadable. Inside were bank ledgers showing Helen's steady deposits into Matt's accounts, property deeds listing her as co-signer, chat transcripts of Chloe asking for money under the guise of family emergencies, vacations, jewelry, cars. Ms. Geller continued without fanfare. Meanwhile, the plaintiff, Ms. Chloe Andrews, publicly and repeatedly accused Ms. Monroe of abandonment, financial negligence, and abuse, none of which is supported by any legal or factual evidence. Across the courtroom, Chloe's lawyer shifted nervously. The judge raised an eyebrow, glancing over the highlighted social media posts. The dates and times matched perfectly against the financial support Helen had quietly and consistently provided. Chloe's lawyer tried to push back, mumbling about implied support and family expectations, but the judge shut him down with a single raised hand. In this court, she said firmly, expectations are not evidence. Obligations end at adulthood. Ms. Monroe provided out of generosity, not necessity. A murmur rippled through the few spectators sitting in the gallery. Matt turned red, ducking his head. Chloe's nostrils flared as she leaned in to whisper furiously to her attorney. The judge sighed heavily and brought her gavel down with a loud, satisfying crack. Judgment awarded to the defendant. Damages set at a nominal figure, but let the record show Ms. Monroe's name is legally cleared. The finality of the moment hit like a physical blow. Chloe surged to her feet, knocking her chair backward. "This isn't over," she hissed, voice cracking with rage and something that sounded dangerously like panic. Matt stayed seated, frozen, his face pale and expressionless. Helen didn't turn to look at them. She didn't need to. She gathered her folder, lifted her chin, and walked down the center aisle, straight-backed, steady, out into the bright sunlight. The steps outside the courthouse gleamed under a perfect blue sky. Helen slid her sunglasses back on, breathing in deeply. The air smelled sweeter than it had in years. Ms. Geller joined her at the bottom of the steps, a rare smile curling at the corners of her mouth. "You know," she said lightly, tucking a few papers under her arm, "some publishers have been asking about you." Helen arched an eyebrow, amused. "Publishers?" Ms. Geller nodded. "They're looking for real stories, stories about strength, about choosing yourself. Yours would sell." Helen laughed softly, genuine and free. Maybe she had lost a family once, but maybe she had found something far rarer in its place, herself. They had tried to sell her story without asking, painted her as bitter, broken, invisible. Helen didn't argue, she didn't correct them. She simply wrote her own story instead, raw, sharp, and anonymous. And when the world finally listened, it wasn't their names people whispered about anymore. It was hers. The idea came not in a rush, but like a tide slowly rising around Helen's ankles. After the courtroom victory, Ms. Geller introduced her to a quiet literary agent, a woman who specialized in anonymous nonfiction for forgotten voices, those whose stories were too real, too raw for polite TV segments. At first, Helen hesitated. Wasn't silence enough? Hadn't she already won by walking away? But as she sat one afternoon on the sun-drenched balcony of her rented beach condo, watching the gulls ride the salt-heavy wind, she realized something. Winning wasn't enough. They had screamed their version into the world. She wanted to tell the truth, clean, pure, and untraceable, just once. The memoir wasn't flashy. It wasn't vengeful. It was precise. Every chapter bled honesty. The invisible years, the quiet sacrifices disguised as what mothers do, the casual erasure at every holiday gathering, the slow erosion of self-esteem disguised as helping. Helen wrote at night, the words pouring out, in clean, sharp lines filling page after page. She never named Chloe or Matt directly. She didn't have to. Truth recognizes itself, even when you change the names. The book was released quietly. No fanfare, no Oprah interviews, no book tours. Just a small indie press, a simple gray cover, and a title that felt like a whisper with a knife behind it. Unpaid dues, the cost of loving the ungrateful. At first, nothing happened. Then, the forums picked it up, online spaces for estranged parents, for caregivers abandoned after years of quiet service, for mothers and fathers who had given everything and been rewarded with silence or contempt. The posts flooded in. "This is my life, every word. I thought I was crazy until now. I cried through the last chapter." She wrote my pain. Within 6 weeks, the ebook sales spiked. Paperback orders doubled. A few small podcasts requested anonymous interviews, which Helen politely declined. She didn't need to explain herself to strangers anymore. Meanwhile, Chloe's online image crumbled, friends unfollowed, sponsorships vanished. Each vague quote about healing was met with cutting comments. Someone even tagged her. "Funny how villains always think they're victims." Matt stayed silent, maybe finally smart enough to know the tide had turned. With royalties trickling in, Helen made one last move. She bought a small beach house 3 towns over. 2 bedrooms, ocean view, paid in full. No loans, no co-signers, just her name on the deed. That evening, she sat on the porch, sea air in her hair, wine in hand. No regrets, just peace. Later, her inbox pinged an email from Matthew. Subject, I miss you, Mom. Helen stared at it. She didn't open it. Some bridges collapse on their own. She closed the laptop and let the waves fill the silence they left behind. Not every unanswered message is a mistake. Some are deliberate. Some are a mirror held up silently to the sender, forcing them to sit alone with the echo of their own choices. Helen didn't delete Matt's email. She didn't block him either. She simply read it and then chose herself. The next morning, the sky over Helen's beach house was painted in soft brushstrokes of rose and gold. She stood barefoot in the kitchen, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of tea, the ocean breeze pushing through the open windows, carrying the salty tang of the sea. On the kitchen counter, her laptop glowed quietly. The email notification still sat there, bold and waiting. From Matt Andrews. Subject, I miss you, Mom. Helen sipped her tea, feeling the weight, or perhaps the lack of it, settle in her chest. Slowly, deliberately, she clicked it open. The message was short. I know we made mistakes. I know we hurt you. I just want to start over. Please call me. I miss you. No apologies for the years, no acknowledgement of the damage, no real ownership. Just the kind of desperate words people sent when they realized the ATM wasn't coming back online. Helen read it once, then again, and then she smiled, a soft, bittersweet thing, and closed the tab. She didn't hit reply. She didn't block him. She left the email exactly where it was, a monument to everything she had finally outgrown. Later that afternoon, she printed the email on a single sheet of heavy cream paper. No edits, no commentary. She found an old wooden frame at a thrift store nearby, weathered and worn smooth by hands she'd never know, and slipped the printout inside. She hung it by the front door of her beach house. Above it, in small etched letters on the frame, she carved the words herself. Absence teaches more than presence ever could. It wasn't cruelty. It was clarity, the kind she had waited decades to find. Helen didn't waste another breath chasing what had already walked away. Instead, she chased new things. At 68, she signed up for surfing lessons, something she had always dreamed of but had been told, gently and patronizingly, was unrealistic for someone her age. The first day, she wobbled on the board, falling spectacularly into the surf. She laughed so hard she startled the instructor. Most people get frustrated, he said, grinning. Helen shook water from her hair, beaming. I spent too long staying dry for everyone else. I'm ready to fall. And stand. And fall again. And she did over and over until one day she caught a small, perfect wave and rode it all the way to shore, cheering like a woman reborn. Helen also joined a local mentoring group. Women over 60 teaching financial independence to newly divorced or widowed seniors. The meetings were small at first, a few weary women, their faces lined with worry and years of invisibility. Helen stood up one evening in the small community center room, holding nothing but her own quiet certainty. You don't have to wait for someone to validate your worth, she said. You don't have to ask for permission to have peace. They listened, and slowly, week by week, their shoulders squared a little more, their laughter returned, their worlds reopened. It wasn't about revenge, it was about repair. One evening, after a long day on the beach and a sunset mentoring session, Helen returned home, humming under her breath. Her phone buzzed once on the entry table, a news alert. She picked it up, expecting another weather warning or local event. Instead, the headline made her pause. Influencer Chloe Andrews declares bankruptcy after defamation settlement fallout. Helen stared at the screen, feeling no victory, no gloating rush of satisfaction, only a quiet, inevitable sense of balance. Settling into place. You can only outrun the truth for so long before it bills you with interest. Helen set the phone down gently. Outside her window, the ocean murmured against the sand, endless and forgiving. She stepped outside onto her porch, the warm wood creaking under her bare feet, and tilted her face up to the stars. Free. Finally, fully free. Some debts don't send warning letters. They wait, silent and patient, growing heavier with time. And when the moment comes, they don't knock politely, they kick the door in. Matt and Chloe thought they had inherited a future they didn't pay for. What they didn't know was that the house they stood so proudly inside still had Helen's name written all over its bones. Helen sat at her small kitchen table, the familiar creak of the wooden chair grounding her as she flipped through old file folders. She hadn't looked at the house documents in years. Back then, it had seemed like such a small thing, helping Matt qualify for a mortgage, a final parental sacrifice wrapped in signatures and blind trust. Helen had believed it was an investment in her son's future. What she hadn't realized was that she was signing her own invisibility at the same time. Now, as she read through the fine print, she smiled. Not bitterly, cleanly. The paperwork was simple. Matt had never finished the transfer of ownership. Her name still legally bound her to 48% of the property, meaning, by law, she was still a co-owner. Meaning, by law, she could force a sale. And that's exactly what she intended to do. Helen filed the partition action without hesitation. Weeks later, Matt received the notice. The house would be sold. His texts and Chloe's voicemails, angry, desperate, went unanswered. The court approved the forced sale. The home, once filled with memories, sold for $460,000. Helen received her $180,000 share. Matt and Chloe, now without a house or a plan, downsized into a small apartment off the highway. Helen didn't gloat. Instead, she quietly donated enough to fund 2 new family units at a women's shelter. It wasn't revenge. It was restoration, built from the ruins they left behind. A few days later, Helen was reading a book on her porch when her phone buzzed. A new post from Chloe. She almost ignored it. Almost, but curiosity won out. On the screen, Chloe's latest outburst: "Old people ruined our generation, took everything and left us with nothing. Boomer problems, not no future." The words were laced with fury, the edges fraying with desperation. Helen closed the app and set the phone aside. She didn't need to answer. The world had already learned the difference between a sob story and the truth told in court. Some inheritances are earned, some debts are collected. And some houses don't cry when you leave them behind, they laugh. Real celebrations don't need noise, they don't need clinking glasses or roaring crowds. Sometimes the loudest victories are the ones witnessed by the ocean, the stars, and the heart that refused to break. Helen's 69th birthday didn't come with fanfare. It came with freedom, bought, paid for, and finally fully hers. The sky blushed pink and gold as the sun dipped lower toward the endless stretch of ocean. On the soft white sands outside her beach house, Helen sat with a small circle of friends, women she had met through her mentoring group, survivors and rebuilders all. There were no balloons, no gaudy banners, only a weathered picnic table dressed in simple linen, small plates of lemon bars and shrimp skewers, and glasses of crisp white wine sweating in the salty air. The laughter that floated up was easy, unforced. No one demanded anything here. No one expected her to save them. Helen leaned back in her chair, letting the sunset burn its colors into her memory. This was her gift to herself, not the party, not the food, not the cake, the permission, the peace. After the small group toasted quietly to her health, Helen pulled a small velvet box from her pocket. She opened it slowly, savoring the moment. Inside lay a simple silver pendant on a delicate chain. Etched into the surface in clean, flowing script were 2 words: "Freedom bought." Helen smiled as she fastened the chain around her neck, feeling the cool kiss of the metal against her skin. A tangible reminder of every hard decision, every boundary. Held, every door she had closed and every window that had swung wide open afterward. The waves rolled in, whispering over the sand like the earth's oldest lullaby. Helen walked to the shoreline barefoot, the wet sand squeezing between her toes, the surf brushing against her ankles. She raised her wine glass slightly toward the horizon, as if toasting something unseen, and took a slow sip. The salty breeze tangled through her hair, and somewhere deep inside her chest, something that had been tight for years finally, mercifully, loosened. She thought about the things she had given up once, The Christmas morning spent waiting for calls that never came, the birthdays forgotten, the hospital visits made alone. Flashes of the past flickered through her mind like an old film reel. Matt's soccer games she never missed, Chloe's college tuition checks signed without hesitation, vacation brochures tucked away in drawers, gathering dust. All those tiny heartbreaks, all those silent sacrifices. She exhaled, slow and sure, gone, not forgotten, but no longer heavy. They had been lessons, not losses. Back at the table, her phone buzzed against the wood, the screen lighting up the darkening dusk. An email notification. She picked it up, scanning the subject line. Invitation. Women's Financial Empowerment Forum. Keynote speaker request. Helen blinked once, then laughed quietly to herself. They wanted her to stand on a stage, to tell her story, to show other women how to untangle themselves from invisible chains. Not a cry for sympathy, not a campaign for pity, a blueprint for freedom. She didn't answer right away. She set the phone down gently beside her wine glass and watched the last sliver of the sun slip beneath the water. The sky melted into indigo, and stars began to pinprick the darkness above. Around her, her new friends chatted easily, passing plates and stories, untouched by the noise and chaos she had once thought unavoidable. Helen smiled, soft, certain. This time she would answer, not out of anger, but out of the deep, quiet joy of belonging wholly to herself. They thought retirement meant slowing down, becoming smaller, fading quietly into the corners of life. But Helen had retired from more than a job. She had retired from every chain disguised as love, every demand masquerading as duty, and in shedding them, she hadn't become smaller. She had become unstoppable. The morning after her birthday, Helen sat at her kitchen table, sunlight pouring through the open windows, the scent of salt water heavy in the air. Before her lay her travel journal, its leather cover soft and worn from months of being tucked into backpacks, beach bags, and hotel room nightstands. She flipped it open, running her fingers over the filled pages. Venice canals, hiking trails in Montana, surf lessons scrolled between recipes she'd learned in a tiny kitchen in Tuscany. Each page was a life she had once believed was out of reach. Each inked line a declaration. I lived. I chose. I mattered. There were no blank spaces anymore, not in the journal, not in her days, not in her heart. Helen sipped her coffee slowly, the ceramic mug warm between her palms. She thought about all the things she had once carried without question, the last-minute babysitting emergencies, the birthday dinners that turned into complaints about how she owed them more, the subtle, crushing comments about how she was nothing, without her role in their lives. She thought about the years where her love had been measured in wire transfers, in sacrifice, in silence, and she realized none of it had broken her. It had forged her. Outside, the waves murmured against the shore, endless and patient. Helen stood, tying her soft gray sweater around her waist, and stepped barefoot onto the path leading to the beach. The sand was cool beneath her feet at first, then warming as the sun rose higher, golden and alive. She walked slowly at first, savoring the crunch of dry shells underfoot, the sharp tang of the ocean, the cry of gulls overhead. With every step, she let more of the past fall away. The Christmas morning she had spent waiting for a call that never came, the hospital bed she had sat beside alone after her surgery, the vacations canceled, the dreams shelved, the love given freely and devoured without thanks. All of it scattered like footprints behind her, erased by the tide. Further down the beach, a family played at the shoreline, laughter rising over the crash of the surf. Helen smiled, not with envy, not with sadness, but with a quiet, fierce kind of hope. Some families healed, some didn't, but peace wasn't something anyone handed you. It was something you bought with hard choices, paid for with boundaries, and protected with a stubborn, unwavering love for yourself. As she reached the curve where the beach met the rocky cliffs, Helen paused. The ocean stretched out endlessly before her, a wild, fearless thing, much like herself now. She closed her eyes and breathed it in, the salt, the sun, the freedom. And then, with deliberate, unhurried steps, she walked into the future she had crafted with her own two hands. Not fragile, not lost, whole. In her travel journal, tucked between the pages, a final entry waited. They laughed at my retirement dreams. I retired them from my life instead. They thought I needed their permission. I needed only my own. Helen smiled as the wind caught the edges of the journal, flipping it closed softly, like the end of a chapter long overdue. Barefoot, windswept, unstoppable, Helen disappeared into the glittering horizon. Every step forward, a quiet revolution. She hadn't just retired from a job. She had retired from the invisible debts, from the unspoken servitude, from the hollow expectation that she would always stay small to make others feel bigger. She hadn't just found freedom, she had earned it. And as the tide rolled in behind her, wiping away the past, one final truth remained. They laughed at my retirement. I made sure they were the ones left bankrupt inside,